Where do thoughts come from? Buddhist wisdom. Right now, as you're watching this, a thought just appeared in your mind. You didn't decide it would come. It just arrived. A second ago, it wasn't there. Now it is. So here's the question almost no one stops to ask. Where did that thought come from? Not in a neuroscience way, not about neurons or brain regions. I'm asking something deeper. Because here's what's strange. You experience thousands of thoughts every day, but can you actually control what thought appears next? Try it, right now. Try to decide your next thought. See what happened? The moment you tried to decide, thoughts about trying appeared. And you didn't choose those either. This isn't just philosophy. The Buddha taught that understanding where thoughts come from is the key to understanding who you are. And when you understand that, not the story you tell yourself, but what you actually are, you discover a freedom you didn't know was possible. So let's begin with the most basic question. Who is the thinker? Who owns the thoughts? Watch your mind for a moment. Notice a thought appearing. Now ask, what is observing that thought? Most people answer, I am. But if I am observing the thought, then I must be separate from it, right? So what is this observer? Another thought? Then who's observing that? And who's observing that observer? You see the problem. Infinite regress. Every time you try to find the I who's watching, you only find another thought. The Buddha pointed this out in the Vina Sutta. Just as when a lute is played, the sound arises dependent on the lute, strings, body, and the player's effort. But there is no sound maker existing independently. The sound is real, but there's no separate entity inside creating it. Sound is what happens when conditions meet. Thoughts are like that. They arise, they're real, but there's no separate thought maker inside your head, only the process of thinking. Now you're probably resisting this. I'm not just a process. I have agency. I can choose what to think about. Let's test that. For the next 60 seconds, try not to think about a white bear. Every time the thought appears, note it. Ready. Try now. What happened? The bear kept showing up, didn't it? Even though you decided not to think about it. This isn't anecdotal. Psychologist Daniel Wegner studied what he called ironic process theory. When people try to suppress a thought, it tends to come back even stronger. The effort to control becomes the condition that creates more of what you're avoiding. And when the white bear appeared, notice the details. What color exactly? What size? Did you consciously design all that? No. The image appeared fully formed. You didn't create it. Here's the crucial point. After the image appeared, another thought came. I just thought about a white bear. The mind takes credit for something that already happened. The sense of I am thinking comes after the thought appeared. This is what the Buddha meant by anatta, not self. In the Anatta Sutta, he examined consciousness and said, if consciousness were self, you could make it exactly as you want. But you can't. Thoughts arise whether you want them to or not. Now the Buddha isn't saying nothing exists. That would be nihilism. He's saying something more subtle. There is no fixed, unchanging, independent entity you can point to and say, that is me. Think about a flame. Does it exist? Yes. But what is it? Not a thing. a process. Rapid oxidation producing heat and light. When conditions are present, there's flame. When they cease, the flame simply isn't, because it never was as a thing. The flame still moves toward fuel, avoids water. Purpose without a purposer. The same with thoughts. They move, connect, follow patterns, but there's no separate thinker making them do so. In Buddhist commentarial tradition, this is later analysis, not original suttas, scholars spoke of two truths: Sammutisaka, conventional truth, and Paramatthasaka, ultimate truth. Conventionally, I am thinking is useful for daily life, communication, responsibility. But ultimately, when you look closely, there are only processes. Conditions giving rise to conditions. The I is a designation we put on a stream of experiences, not a thing existing independently. Both truths are useful. For living your life, conventional truth matters. For freeing yourself from suffering, which the Buddha focused on, you need the ultimate truth. The self you're trying to protect doesn't exist as you think it does. So the owner of your thoughts is itself just another thought. The observer is just another appearance, not something standing behind it. There is thinking, but no thinker. But if there's no I creating thoughts, where do they actually come from? That's where we go next, into the web of conditions. Thoughts arise from conditions. If you're not creating your thoughts, where are they coming from? This brings us to Paticca dependent origination. The Buddha called it the heart of his teaching. Whoever sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. The formula: when this exists, that exists. When this arises, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases. Nothing exists by itself. Everything arises from conditions. Think about a seed sprouting. No soil, no sprout, no water, sunlight, warmth, no sprout. The seed alone creates nothing. Only when all these conditions meet does a sprout appear, not from one source, but from all conditions meeting together. Thoughts work the same way. Let me show you with something seemingly simple. I am angry. Someone said something upsetting. Anger arises, feels immediate. They made me angry. But let's slow it down. What follows is a pedagogical model synthesizing multiple Buddhist teachings: the process of perception, the nature of contact, and the mutual dependence of consciousness and mental physical phenomena. First, Salayatana, the 6 sense bases. Your ear functions as a door through which sound enters. Second, Phassa, contact. Your ear base, the sound, and ear consciousness meet together simultaneously. The Buddha was precise. Contact is the meeting of these 3 factors at once. This consciousness element is already present, interwoven with the entire process. Third, Vedana, feeling tone. Not emotion yet, just pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The sound carries an unpleasant tone. But why unpleasant? Fourth, Sanya, perception. Your mind instantly labels, this is criticism. This is disrespect. But insult isn't in the sound waves. Another person might hear the same words as concern or humor. The interpretation is constructed by your mind based on past learning, culture, personal history. Fifth, the arising of craving and clinging, tanha and upadana. The moment your mind labels insult, wanting and grasping emerge. You want respect. You cling to your self-image. Sixth, sankhara, mental formations. All your past conditioning springs into action. Family taught you, don't let people disrespect you. Culture values face. You've been criticized before and it hurt. These patterns pull you in certain directions. Finally, the story. I am angry. Not just anger as sensation, but the narrative tying it together. I'm angry because they insulted me. This is wrong. I need to respond. The thought seems simple, but it's the end point of multiple steps, each dependent on countless factors. A crucial point. Throughout this process, consciousness isn't standing outside observing neutrally. Consciousness and mental physical phenomena are mutually dependent, like two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. Consciousness is woven throughout the whole web, not a separate step. And we haven't gone deeper. Why were you there? A decision hours ago, an invitation days ago, a relationship built over years. Why do you speak that language? Born in a particular place. Why does your brain interpret sounds as insults? Evolutionary programming making social rejection feel threatening. Every condition has conditions. You can trace it back to childhood, genetics, evolution, cosmic history. Where does it stop? It doesn't. Just conditions giving rise to conditions in an infinite web. This is what Nagarjuna realized with his doctrine of shunyata, emptiness. He said, because all phenomena arise dependently, I say they are empty. They are also designated conventionally. This very thing is the middle way. Empty doesn't mean non-existent. The anger is real. You experienced it. But it's empty of svabhava, independent, self-existing essence. The thought has no inherent nature belonging to it alone. It's a temporary convergence of countless conditions meeting in just the right way to produce that experience in that moment. When those conditions come together, a thought appears. When they disperse, it disappears. The thought never had independent existence. It was always just a pattern, a wave, a momentary form. And here's why this matters practically. Because thoughts are empty. Because they don't have fixed nature. They can change. If anger were your essential nature, practice would be hopeless. But because it's just conditions, change the conditions and thoughts change. This is why meditation works. Why therapy works. Why people who once flew into rage can become calm. The anger wasn't their nature. It was conditions. And conditions can be transformed. But now the deeper question. If thoughts arise from conditions, and those conditions arise from other conditions endlessly, what keeps it all going? What's the fuel? That's where we go next, to the root, to ignorance. The root, ignorance as the fuel. We've seen thoughts don't come from a you. They arise from conditions in an infinite web. But why? What keeps this system running? The Buddha's answer: avidya, ignorance. Not stupidity, but seeing wrongly. Imagine a distorting lens you've worn so long you don't know it's there. This ignorance manifests in three ways: seeing permanence, where there's impermanence; satisfaction, where there's unsatisfactoriness; and self, where there's not self. It creates the illusion of a separate, permanent me, where, ultimately, only experiences flow. You might ask, when did ignorance start? The Buddha consistently pointed to the beginningless nature of samsara itself. In the Anattamattagga Sutta, he declared, "This samsara is without discoverable beginning." There's no knowable starting point for this cycle, fundamentally fueled by ignorance. Asking when often assumes a neutral timeline, but the Buddha considered such speculative questions unhelpful, like someone shot by a poisoned arrow refusing treatment until knowing who shot it. You'd die before getting answers. Though beginningless, ignorance can end, like darkness vanishing when a light is turned on. But if ignorance creates thoughts, and everything arises from conditions you didn't choose, aren't you a puppet? Does this destroy free will? No. Buddhism is not fatalism. Fatalism says, everything is predetermined. Nothing you do matters. Buddhism says, everything arises from conditions. Change the conditions. Change the result. This is the opposite. It means change is always possible. As the Buddha taught in the Kaccanagotta Sutta, the middle way avoids both eternalism, a permanent self with absolute free will, and nihilism, no choice, no responsibility. Here's how agency works. When you sit to meditate, intention, satana, arises from conditions, perhaps suffering or inspiration. That intention becomes a condition for what happens next. Watching your breath creates conditions for breath thoughts, not dinner thoughts. Repeatedly, this creates new patterns. Your mind becomes less scattered, not because a fixed you rearranged it, but because you created conditions that produced results. The beautiful paradox. Because there's no fixed I, change is possible. If you were a permanent self with fixed nature, you'd be stuck. Because you're a process arising from conditions, new conditions create new patterns. This leads to real freedom. Not the false freedom of an independent I that controls everything, which only creates suffering. But freedom from the I itself. Freedom not to stop thoughts, but freedom from being imprisoned by them, from mistaking them for who you are. As the Buddha put it, when ignorance ceases, thoughts no longer bind. So what happens when you see this directly? When understanding brings freedom. We've traveled far. We've seen there's no fixed I. Thoughts arise from conditions, and ignorance is the fuel. But all of this is still conceptual. The Buddha was clear. It's not about acquiring new views. It's about seeing directly. What does that looking involve? The Buddha's instructions. Observe the arising and passing away of phenomena. Watch a thought arise. Just watch. Don't analyze, judge, push away, or hold on. Just see. Arising. Watch it persist for a moment. See. Persisting. Watch it cease. See. Ceasing. Arising, persisting, ceasing. Over and over. This is vipassana, insight meditation. What do you see when you do this carefully? That consciousness itself is also arising and passing. In the Mahanidana Sutta, the Buddha made this explicit. Consciousness must have a condition. In the Anattalakkhana Sutta, is consciousness permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. So the practice isn't seeking a consciousness entity. It's observing, thought arising, persisting, ceasing. Seeing clearly the three characteristics: impermanence, suffering, not self. When you see this clearly, something shifts. You no longer identify with thoughts. Thoughts appear like passing clouds, seen but not grasped. Freedom isn't no thoughts. Freedom is not being controlled by them. Some later Buddhist schools developed the idea of an unchanging awareness as eternal ground. But in the Nikayas, the earliest texts, everything that arises passes away, including consciousness. Nothing unchanging to find. Only the direct seeing of impermanence, suffering, and not self. This might sound discouraging. Nothing stable, nothing to rest on, but the stability you're seeking. That search itself creates instability, like someone in quicksand struggling for solid ground. When they stop struggling, they can float. When you stop seeking a permanent self, when you see everything as arising and passing, something paradoxical happens. You relax, not into something, but as everything. Back to our original question. Where do thoughts come from? After this journey, when you see clearly through practice, the question dissolves. Not because you found an answer, but because you saw the nature directly. Thoughts arise from conditions, cease with conditions. There's no I owning them, just phenomena passing through. Think of waves on water. Waves arise, waves cease. No independent wave entity. Even water isn't unchanging. Water too is impermanent, dependently arisen. Nothing to grasp. That is freedom. In the Adittapariyaya Sutta, the fire sermon, the Buddha said, "Seeing thus, the instructed noble disciple becomes disenchanted with the I, with forms, with the mind, with mental phenomena. Being disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, he is liberated." Disenchanted doesn't mean depressed. It means no longer enchanted by the illusion, no longer fooled by the magic trick. You see how it works, and in seeing, you're free. The Buddha's teaching carries a quality called 𝐴𝐻𝐵𝐵𝐸𝐵𝐸. Come and see for yourself. Not come and believe, come and see. So sit down, observe the mind, see for yourself the arising passing of thoughts. When you see, not through theory but through direct experience, you'll understand. The question has dissolved. What remains is clear seeing, paññā, wisdom that sees as it is the impermanent, suffering, not self-nature of all phenomena. That is the path to freedom. Not a freedom you acquire, but a freedom you discover was always here, hidden only by the belief that you were separate from it.